Welcome back. We are going to be studying infinitives for the next 30 minutes or so. We're going to be studying, in particular, Qal infinitives. Remember, Qal means light or unencumbered, nothing additional added to the meaning. So our basic form of infinitives is what we'll be studying today. Also part of Chapter 16 of the Coutts and Joesberger textbook. So we're going to start today by asking the question, what in the world is an infinitive? But then we'll talk about the Qal infinitive construct and the Qal infinitive absolute. There are two forms of the infinitive in Hebrew. There's only one form of the infinitive in English, but so this is a bit different. But as you can see, it uses some of those principles of being in construct and being absolute. Remember from our construct chain? Well, infinitives can be put in construct or they can stand absolutely right by themselves. So all to say that there's these two slightly different forms that look a little bit different, but they essentially do similar things. So what is an infinitive? Well, a finite verb. So infinitive means an infinite verb, one that is not finite. A finite verb is one that has been marked for stem, like call, aspect, like perfect, person, and number and gender. So like, third masculine singular or something like that. So an infinitive would be like, I went to the store the other day. That's a finite verb. Or they will go to the store tomorrow. Those are finite verbs in English. They are marked for person, number, gender. In English, we mark them for tense, like past tense, future tense, right? That's all part of making a finite verb. So went and will go are finite forms of the verb to go. That verb to go, that's the infinitive version, or the infinite, the not finite version, right? To go is the infinitive form of the verb. So the infinitive form means you haven't put it into any particular form yet. You haven't marked it for gender, number, time, in Hebrew, aspect, stem, right? Any of these things yet. So it's the kind of most plain, most generic form of the verb you can possibly have. So, like I said, in English, to go, to see, to want, to have, those are the infinitive forms of the verb. So in English, as I said, we have this preposition to that we add to this generic form of the verb in order to create the preposition. Well, we don't do that in Hebrew. We don't add prepositions to them to make them infinitives. Infinitives exist on their own. They're a form all by themselves. Infinitives also, we can say, are verbal nouns. Remember that our lesson that we just had on participles, those participles were verbal adjectives, like a walking one, a sitting one, right? Well, infinitives are verbs, words that describe action, that act as nouns. So when I say, I want to fly a plane, to fly is the object of the verb want. I am the subject. I want to fly, right? To fly is what I want. It's a thing, but it's not a thing. It's an action, right? But grammatically, in the way that it works in my sentence, I'm treating it like a thing. So when we treat an action like a thing, in terms of grammar, if we make it in our sentence into a thing that we can want or have or something like that, then what we're doing is we're making an infinitive. Infinitives are verbal nouns, just like participles were verbal adjectives. So these non-finite verbs have no person, no number, no gender. In English, we would say to be, to have, to look. In Hebrew, there are two different forms of these infinitives. And they occur in these two forms are the absolute and the construct state. And you already know this form because it's based on the imperative, at least in part. So what is an infinitive? Okay, in Hebrew, infinitives, they're not preceded by a preposition, like I said, so to, run, to, go. They don't do that in Hebrew. And we're going to learn these two distinct forms, the construct and the absolute. So here they are. Here's both of these forms, the absolute and the construct. We're going to use our paradigmatic root, katal, the one that we usually use for these things, but we can also show you shamar, another root that we often use, so that we don't have to keep talking about killing all the time, sorry. But you can see the construct state is actually the one that is built directly off of, the construct state. As you can see, the construct state is the one that is built directly on the imperative form. The imperative, remember the imperative was a second person command, like get up, go, clean this up, right? The imperative is identical to the infinitive construct. Well, how can you tell the difference? Well, we'll see. In context, something is either a command or it's like, if you say like, I want to fly, I mean, if that looks identical in Hebrew, like to fly and fly the command, then it's not going to make sense one way or the other in a sentence, right? You can't. It'd be very difficult to build a sentence in which both of those worked exactly the same, and it was really hard to tell the difference between them. It's hard to tell the difference between how they look, but it's not hard to tell the difference between which one it is in context in the middle of a sentence. In any event, so katol is the absolute form over here on the left, katol, and then shamor. These occur in an absolute state. We'll get to what that is in a little bit. But this construct form, katol and shamor, you can see over here, they start with that schwa, and they have that theme vowel, just like the imperative does. Remember, the imperative was built off of our Qal imperfect second person forms. We took off our prefix, our tav prefix, and then when this is what we were left with. So the Qal imperfect second person masculine singular would be tiktol and tishmor. We took off the ta, and then we were left with katol and shamor. Now the absolute forms have this longer A-class vowel underneath the first radical. Those seem to have been kind of a retroinjection, like Hebrew speakers had some more space to add. Say they didn't have to kind of cut it so much, like the beginning of the infinitive construct and the imperative. So when they had some more space, when it was absolute, they filled that space up by adding this big long A-class vowel. But what marks it still is that you have this long O-class vowel in between your second and third radical. So just to repeat a bit, if we have an O-class vowel over our first radical, that's a sign of the Qal active participle. If we have a U-class vowel in between our second and third radical, that is a sign of a Qal passive participle. If we have a long O-class vowel between our second and third radical, that is a sign, and nothing preceding it, and no prefixes, right, and no suffixes. If it's just the root with this long O vowel between the second and third radical, what we're looking at then is our infinitive or imperative. And we'll have to tell the difference based on context. So the Qal infinitive absolute. Here we're going to start with the absolute. It's pretty easy to recognize. It has a long A-class vowel under our first radical and this long O-class vowel between a second and third radical. Here's our strong root katal. Notice that we can have it be spelled fully or defectively. That's a terrible term, but it's what the grammarians use. Full meaning with the holem vav, defective meaning just a holem. Just a holem, how disgusting, or something, whatever. So in any event, there's a couple of different ways that this occurs. Again, you don't need to memorize these weak roots. I'm just introducing you to them. Just notice you can have a sneaky patak jump in there every once in a while. You still got your long A-class vowel under your first radical and your holem vav between your second and third radical. So there's other weak versions of this too, by the way, but they're actually fairly easy to recognize. They keep that they are strong in terms of the fact that the Qal infinitive absolute doesn't add stuff to the beginning or the end of the word. So you generally don't lose these weak vowels. So how would you use these infinitive absolutes? Well, you could use them as a verbal noun, like the English gerund, which basically means an ing ending, like running, jumping. Now, I know that in English, the infinitive is like to run, to jump, to go. But in Hebrew, they use them in a way that oftentimes they work like gerunds work in English. So running, jumping. And I'll show you some examples in a minute. Also, they can be used for emphasis, before an imperfect or after an imperative. If you ever see the same verb show up twice in a row, the exact same root, but in two different forms, what you're looking at is an emphatic way of saying verbs in Hebrew. It means like you're really going to do something. I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. It can also mean simultaneous action and continuance. It can be a stand-in for the imperative. It's the same form as the imperative, but it's a little bit different, right? With the infinitive absolute has that long vowel under the first radical. Here we might say that some scribe might have misread the imperative for the infinitive absolute, but the infinitive can actually function that way sometimes. And then every once in a while, it can kind of take the place of a finite verb in this somewhat strange way. It's that occurs rarely, and I'll show you that at the very end. Most of the time, when an infinitive absolute shows up, it's going to work like a verbal noun. So here's an example of what that is. So sason, yeah, look, it's a seen, not a sheen here. She is always white, right? Sason is joy. Jack Sasson is a great biblical scholar whose name, he's a Jewish biblical scholar whose name is actually this Joy. So joy, and then simcha, which is gladness, and by the way, simcha is also a name of a Jewish name as well, so gladness. So here, joy and gladness, sason v'shimcha, harog bakar v'shachot tzon. So joy and gladness, and then slaying cattle. Harag means to butcher, to slay, and then bakar is cattle. So slaying cattle, and v'shachot, that's another word that means it's like a technical word meaning butcher, and then son, sheep. So why would slaying cattle and slaughtering sheep be full of joy and gladness? It's because you're getting ready for a celebration. This is what you use, slaughtering the fatted calf, right? Everyone's about to have a big party, and they're getting food ready to feed people, and the kind of food that you would have only in times of celebration, which is meat, which people generally would not eat. So in any event, sason v'shimcha, but then harog, the root is he, resh, gimel. And notice you have your long A-class vowel under your first radical, and you have this O vowel in between your second and third. That's your Qal infinitive absolute. You have the same thing here, your long A-class vowel, and then your O-class vowel between your second and third. So this is your Qal infinitive absolute. So to slay. So really, in Hebrew, this is kind of like joy and gladness. To slay cattle and to slaughter sheep. But it doesn't work that well in English to say it that way. It really works better to use these gerunds like ing, slaying cattle and slaughtering sheep. So this is like, getting ready for a celebration. Here's another example. L'dato ma'os bara uvahor batov. So ladato. So here's lamed, our preposition here, and then yada is to know something. Da'at is knowledge, like to know him. So for his knowing, really, is what this means. And then ma'os. Ma'as means to reject. So we have, our root is mem, aleph, samek, and we have this long A under our first radical. We have this Holim Vav between our second and our third. That's the Qal infinitive absolute form. So to refuse. And then ba-ra. When you refuse something in Hebrew, you refuse at it or refuse in it. It's funny, but that's the preposition. The preposition bait marks like what you are refusing. So to refuse, ba-ra, which ra means evil. To refuse with evil. That means in English that we translate that to refuse evil. Uvahor batov, and then bahar is to choose. So bahor, this is a long A and a long holim, right? Long A under your first radical, a holim between your second and third radical, holim above. That's your Qal infinitive absolute form. This is a shorek here. It's just the and, right? So, and to choose, batov, the good. Again, the bait, the preposition bait, marking what it is that you have chosen. So in Hebrew, you say to reject with evil and to choose with good. That means to reject things that are evil and to choose things that are good. But so in any event, so for his knowing, like when he knows evil and chooses the good. This is part of the blessing. I mean, the prophecy of salvation in Isaiah, right? This is Isaiah chapter 7, the Emmanuel prophecy. God is with us. So here we have our infinitive absolutes, our call infinitive absolutes, which are functioning. In English, we could translate this with the gerund as well. We could say when he knows, when he understands, refusing evil and choosing good. It just sounds better in English to use the English infinitive here, to refuse evil and to choose good. But just to say, these are both options for translating the call infinitive absolute. So another example here, achol davash harbot lo tov. So achol means to eat. Achol, notice our holum, it's kind of poorly positioned here. I'm sorry. This font every once in a while, it usually works pretty good, but every once in a while I can't get it to work right. But this is one of those examples where it just didn't want to go in the right place. But this holum should be really kind of sitting here between the second and third letters. But so achol is to eat, and then davash is honey, to eat honey, and then ha-rabot, like rov means many or much, right? So ravot is like much, to eat much honey. Lo tov, not good, right? Eat too much honey and you feel sick. I don't know if you've ever done that before, but it is true. If you eat too much honey, you don't feel good at all. So in any event, achol, to eat honey or eating honey. You can translate that either way in English, but it's the call infinitive absolute. Another term, and remember I said you can kind of repeat the same root twice in a row, and it usually means emphatic. This is, in Hebrew, this occurs quite a bit. And so like when, God says, you shall certainly die, in Genesis chapter 2, mot tamut. So tamut is our call imperfect, second person. Mot is our root that means to die. Tamut, this is our tav prefix. And this is our, and now I know you didn't learn the weak forms of the call imperfect, but this is the call imperfect weak root, middle weak root. But this means you shall die. But then mot comes before that. And mot is this weak form of the call infinitive absolute. So to die, you shall die is what this says literally. But what it means is you will really die. And so in English it's translated as you shall certainly die, right? But it doesn't quite mean certainly. I mean, it's this emphatic, you're really going to die, is what that means. Or here's another example. Remember, shamar means to watch over or keep. So shamor, we have an A-class vowel under our first radical. We have a long O-class vowel between our second and third. That's our call infinitive absolute. And then we have the same root there next, but it's in the call imperfect form, tishmor. Shamor tishmor. So to watch, you shall watch. Or to keep, you shall keep. Which means you shall really keep, or diligently keep, certainly keep. This is about the law, the Torah, in Deuteronomy chapter 6. You really are going to keep the law, right? You shall really keep these statutes and these commandments that have been commanded to you. Here's another example with the verb yatzah, which means to go out. So yetze, yatzo. That second one there, yatzo, we have our long A-class vowel under our first radical. We have our holum vav between our second and third. That's our call infinitive absolute. This, you don't know that yet, but that's okay. That's our strange weak form of the call imperfect here. So that is, he will go out to go out, or he will really come out. Okay, so in emphasis, it can sometimes occur after this imperative. So here we have this verb harag, which means to kill, to slay. So harageni, you don't know this quite yet, but this is the ni, which is like me, and harag is to kill. So this is actually like kill. This is the imperative form here. It's a slightly strange form. Don't worry, we'll get to the adding object suffixes onto verbs later. But kill me, and then na, which is that kind of untranslated particle that goes with imperatives or other expressions of will. some people say like it means please. It doesn't really. It doesn't. It's not an etiquette thing. It just is telling someone, hey, what I just said is an expression of my will, in case it wasn't clear. It's a bit like et, marking the direct object. So you don't need to translate it in English, but it just helps you as a translator to know that what you've just translated is an expression of will. So kill me, and then harog, to kill me to kill. I mean, really kill me is what this means. And this coming from Numbers 11. So shim'u shamoa elai. So shama means to hear, to listen up, right? So shim'u, this is our imperatival form. This looks a little bit like a call perfect, but we don't have enough vowels here for a call perfect. Remember, call perfect likes A-class vowels underneath our radicals. But here we just have this I. What happened was we had this vowel reduction. We had two schwas in a row here, and that turned into a hirak here. This is our masculine plural form of the imperative. Shim'u. It looks like there's not enough vowels there, right? That's a sign of the call imperative here. So shim'u, so to listen. And then shamoa, here's our call infinitive absolute, because we have an A-class vowel under our first radical, but then we have this O-class vowel between our second and third. This is our call infinitive absolute. Shim'u shamoa elai. So listen, to listen, and then elai, to me. Listen to me. That means really listen up. Here's another potential translation possibility for the call infinitive absolute, and that is simultaneous action or continuance, like if two things are happening at the exact same time. So here we have a sentence here, Vayelech haloch va'achol. You don't quite know this yet, but Vayelech it's a Vayic tol form, right? You know that. But it's the form of the verb halak. That first hey in halak, it's strange. It's the only hey that first hey that kind of does this, but it just vanishes. But in any event, here's another form of that verb afterwards, halach. So you could say, and he went walking. Halak means to walk, and he went, or he walked. Walking. Here's our long A-class vowel under our first radical, our hol and ba between the second and third. That's called infinitive absolute. V'achol. We have that same pattern. A-class, O-class, and achal means to eat. So, and he went to walk and to eat. What this means in Hebrew is, and he went walking and eating. That's how they say it. So, and he went along eating is how they translate that in English, smoothing it out a bit there. Those are our call infinitive absolutes. So, hamayim, hayu, haloch, chasor. So hamayim, and the water, and then hayu, this is a form of the verb haya, and the water was haloch, to go, chasor, and to diminish. So it was going and diminishing, or the water was continuing to diminish. This is during the Noah story when the waters recede. So chasor, by the way, means to diminish, to decrease. So the water was going on decreasing. Here's another example here. Vayisa Avram haloch v'nasoa hanegava. Sorry. So this verb right here, this is a vayic tol, like you see this kind of storytelling form of the verb. And then this is a form of the verb nasa. The noon, this front here, this vayi part got stuck onto the front of the verb. The noon got scared and jumped into the samek, which noons are known to do. So this is nasa, which means to set out or journey. And Abram journeyed. Here, by the way, is Abram our subject, right? And then haloch, again, the call infinitive absolute form of going. And then v'nasoa, which is again from nasa, the same verb here, to journey, going and journeying. And then ha-negavah. So the Negev is the Negev desert, the southern desert. It's also a direction towards the Negev. Kametz Hey here added directionally. Negev words. Abram kept on journeying towards the Negev desert, or we might translate it in English, towards the south, because we don't have a Negev desert in the United States, or where you live, you may have a Negev desert. There are some people in the class who do live near the Negev desert. So for you, that does mean southward, but not for everyone does that mean southward. For me, it would mean kind of eastward. But in any event, so we might translate those directional Hebrew words sometimes to fit like a more general schema for people who don't live in the region. So infinitive absolute is sometimes functions as an imperative, like, get up, go, and, get dressed, whatever. So zakor here, remember the Sabbath day. Zakor et yom ha-shabbat. So zakar means to remember. Remember, what's that word I can't remember? So that's zakor. So the long A under the first radical and the hole and vav between the second and third, that is our marker of the Qal infinitive absolute. So to remember, et yom ha-shabbat, the day of the Sabbath. Yom is in construct here, so et, that's the object. So remember, object, day of ha-shabbat, of the Sabbath. So this is, remember, this is part of the Ten Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day. So this is functioning as an imperative, but it's the form of the Qal infinitive absolute. Remember that the infinitive absolute, or the infinitive construct form, this one we haven't got to yet, that form is built off of the imperative. So there's a similarity there deep in the Hebrew mind, and they know this, and they sometimes kind of swap them back and forth a bit. So shamor et yom hashavat. Shamar means to keep, right, or to watch over. So keep the Sabbath day, observe the Sabbath day, and keep it holy. By the way, these are the two different ways this occurs in the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments do change a bit in Hebrew between the version in Deuteronomy 5 and the version in Exodus 28, especially on the remembering of the Sabbath day. The reason for why you do the Sabbath is different in those two versions of the Ten Commandments. Interesting to see, right? So, haloch v'debarta el David. So, haloch, that's our Qal infinitive absolute form of halak, to go. So, going, and then v'debarta, from diber, which means to say. So going and saying el David. So going and you will say to David is really what and you did say to David, really. Don't worry about the chain of verbs here. I'll actually teach more about the chain of verbs later. But just know that haloch looks like a Qal infinitive absolute. It is, in fact, but it's functioning really kind of here like an imperative. Go and speak to David is really what this means. So again, this is fairly rare. You're not going to run into this like in the translation for this week or something. It's just a possibility. It exists in the language. Sometimes it can occur as a finite verb. So here, naton, from Natan, like the verb, the name Nathan means to give. It's the Hebrew word for to give, right? Nathan. Natan means he gave. So naton is and to give, and then oto, that's our object, him, and to give him, or set him, al kol eretz Mitzrayim, over all the land of Egypt. In the Joseph story, this is how it actually occurs in the text. I think there's a different form given to you in the Kutz-Josberger textbook, but in the reader that we have, just because you hadn't got to this yet. But here, this is an infinitive absolute, but like in the flow of the sentence, it works better if you say, and like Pharaoh set him, that is Joseph, over all Egypt. It kind of works better that way. So you have some leeway. You have freedom, in fact, a responsibility as a translator to make things make sense in English, but also at the same time try to represent the Hebrew as well as you can. So that's the tension. So here, do you want to translate it as a gerund or something, setting him over all the land of Egypt? Or do you want to translate it as a finite verb and he set him, as if it's a call perfect or a vayetol, even though it's not? Those are decisions you have to make, but it's possible to defend using the infinitive absolute in English, translating as a finite verb. I'll skip the other examples here, but I'll just keep them up so you can see these later, or I guess there's only one of them. But just all to say, this is a possibility. Okay, so remember we have two forms of the infinitive. We have our absolute and we have our construct. Remember our construct nouns? Like this, shalom means peace, right? Shalom, peace. You might be able to see, actually, this is an infinitive construct, an infinitive absolute form that's actually been used as a noun, became a noun over time. You can see that now, right? A class vowel under O between, right? To be peaceful, to be full. So in any event, but I'll just say it functions as a noun now. Shalom, shalom, peace. The construct form, you'd like you remember we shift the stress to the next word, and we reduce the long vowels at the beginning of the word. Remember, we speak it. We kind of say the word more quickly when it's in construct. We kind of swallow those long vowels at the beginning of the word in order to make it flow faster because it's in construct to the next word. So shalom, if we put it in construct, if we want to say peace of Jerusalem, so shalom Yerushalayim means peace of Jerusalem. But if we put it in construct, we have to swallow that first vowel, so it becomes shalom Yerushalayim, or the peace of God, shalom Elohim. Shalom Elohim, peace of God. Or names, the Shemot. This is actually the name of the book of Exodus in Hebrew, Shemot. So it'd be Shmot, actually. So because we add this, plural ending, names of, if you say like the names of Israel. So Shemot Yisrael, you'd actually have to, because it's in construct, you have to reduce that vowel. So it's Shemot Yisrael. Okay, so remember that's how construct nouns work. Well, construct infinitives work a bit like that. So remember our absolute form was like katol. Well, our construct form is katol. So it's the same as the imperative, right? So, but with that short vowel the schwa, taking the place of the long vowel, the long A class vowel. So shamor becomes shmor. Bahor, to choose, become the infinitive form of to choose becomes bahor. So we have, again, this kind of swallowed vowel. So since the infinitive often functions like a gerund, remember those ing words like running, jumping, talking, since the infinitive often functions like that in Hebrew, then it can take a suffix. So to keep or keeping, if you add the suffix my to that, it would be my keeping. Or to see or seeing, if you add a suffix to that, you can make it your seeing or his doing or something like that. So that often, that's when you have it in construct. That's why you'd have an infinitive in construct to something. So that should then guide the way that we translate it. So I'll show you some examples in a minute. So there are changes to the infinitive construct before the suffix. So ordinarily, you have katol, and then you might add an ending to it, right? So that's actually going to, when we add this ending, so like shamor, you see over here on the left, shamor, right? That's our basic form. If we add an ending to it, the hirek yod, then we're actually going to reduce this vowel here, this middle vowel. That's one of those rules. This long O class vowel gets reduced when we add the ending, but then we have two schwas in a row. So it ends up becoming a short O here. This is a kametz chatuf. I'm very sorry. Remember those, it looks like a kametz, that long A class vowel, really it's a short O class vowel. Now look, you're not going to get points taken off if you don't recognize that's a short O. Your Jewish friends, if you know how to say these letters, they're not going to laugh at you for getting this wrong. But if you want to say that, an infinitive construct correctly, then it's good to realize that this is a short O. Now, how would you ever know this? Because when you have a long A class vowel, what looks to be a long A class vowel before a schwa, it's suspect. Remember, let's cut up our syllables. We start at the end of the word. We cut here, right? And then we're left with re. That's one syllable. And then we have a choice. We can either have this long syllable, sha, and then a really short one, ma, or we can have shom. If these are two consonants and one vowel in one unstressed syllable, then this has got to be a short vowel. And so that's what it is. We got this short vowel. So shomri. Or the verb achal, to eat. Here we have echol. That's this should be a schwa, right? But remember, gutturals like aleph don't take simple schwas. They take these complex schwas. So here's our complex schwa. But then we also, if we add an ending like e, like this is to eat. If I want to say my eating, this is actually the way I would say my eating and my sleeping are important to me, right? So I would say like ochli. That would be how I would say this. And here's the hirek yod that marks that for me. So again, it's because we add the ending and then we get this vowel reduction of the holum, but then we have two schwas in a row. Isn't this amazing that human brains can do this? Hebrew speakers in the ancient world did this. They just figured all these rules out. They didn't consciously think about them. There's no grammar of ancient Hebrew written. They just knew how to do this. It's amazing what human brains can do that we don't even understand that we're doing. But they make all these rules and then they are actually consistent with them. Amazing. But we people who speak English or whatever your native language is, you do this in your language all the time. You do all these amazingly precise complicated kind of equations in your brain all the time as you're speaking. And sometimes we get it wrong, just like I got that last sentence wrong, didn't I? I said something about, I don't know, equations, or I stumbled over my words. We do get things wrong, and they got things wrong in the ancient world too. But all to say, it still is pretty amazing. So before second masculine singular and second masculine plural suffixes, then you'll usually get this other form, not kotol. You'll get this katol form. You'll actually get this O class vowel, short O class vowel underneath the second radical. So again, I wish the Qal infinitive construct was simple, but in fact, the way that I usually go about recognizing it is if I don't understand what form it is, and it's got a suffix after it, if it's got a suffix stuck onto the verb, and if I don't recognize the form, especially if there's a bunch of schwas around, I guess infinitive construct, and I get it right a lot of the time. So this is my job, and I still you still have to guess sometimes. Just so you know, if you've got this form of the verb with some schwas that show up in some strange places, and you got a suffix added to it, Qal infinitive construct is likely what you are looking at. So to keep, shamor is our Qal infinitive construct to keep. It's in construct because we added some ending to it here. So, but that also changes our vowels around when we add endings to these words, Hebrew words. We will lose some long vowels. We will have to compensate by adding some other vowels somewhere. So shamorcha is to keep you, or you're keeping. It's really the to keep of you is what it is in Hebrew. So the to keep of you is your keeping. Again, it works a lot better if we translate this with what in English we call the gerund, the ing words. So achol, to eat. Chalchem, this should be a segel here, sorry. Acholchem, to eat of you, or the eating of you, or your eating. Every once in a while you get this really weird kittel or kottel stem. So bit chacha, so batach means to trust. So bit chacha, or za'akach. Here we have this. It's not cha. This is a feminine ending here. Kach. So za'ak means to cry out. Za'akach means the crying out of you, or your crying out. So God heard your crying out. The fact that you cried out, right? That would be said in this way here. There's lots of A-class vowels here. How would you even recognize that this is a Qal infinitive construct? It doesn't look anything like these other Qal infinitive constructs. Well, like I said, if you see a version of this verb, see just 3 letters of a root, there's no beginnings to it, there's no prefixes, there's no suffixes except for this object suffix. There's an object suffix stuck on here. Oftentimes, too, these have prepositions stuck on the front of them. Like, God listened to your crying. There would be a lamed here stuck onto it. There's a saying that I often say in my exegesis classes, which is, if you see a lamed stuck onto a verb you're looking at an infinitive construct. And then there will often be an object suffix on the end of it. So again, just like all other Hebrew verbs, there are these weak roots that this can show up in. You're not being tested on this, but at the very end of the semester, I'm going to ask you to try to learn some of these forms. So, just let this information flow over you and try to retain it if you can. But if you look at these forms, galot, banot, asot, hayot, if you look, those all have ot endings, right? That's a feminine plural ending. You take that away, and you're left with 2 letters each time: gal, ban, as, and hay. If you notice, like this one, So, asa, you know that means to do or make. So these are actually what third hays do when you put them in the infinitive construct. They get this feminine plural ending. Doesn't mean feminine plural. It's not marked for gender. This is just what they do. Now remember, I'm not testing you on this. You don't have to remember this. I'm just showing you that there are these anomalous forms. How would you ever know this? Well, if you can figure out what the root is, like asa. Remember we looked at this and we said, well, it's a feminine plural form. I know what ayin and sin are often doing together. They're often making up part of the verb asa. If you look up asa in the dictionary, in the BDB, it will show you infinitive construct form, and it'll show you a sot. And then it'll tell you like where it occurs in the Bible and things. But all to say, this is one of those strange forms. I'm just showing this to you just so maybe it sticks someday, right? But also trying to teach you how to figure out what forms are even if you don't know them. And some part of that involves looking it up in the dictionary. Remember that the infinitive construct of third hay roots always ends with ot. Again, doesn't mean feminine plural, although it is the feminine plural ending. It's a strange, strange thing. Okay, now how do you use these? Well, often just like with the infinitive absolute as a verbal noun. Here's an example. Shamoa mizbach tov. So remember, shama means to hear or listen. I have my holum between my second and third radical. I have a sneaky patak here because it's a third ayin. But here's my reduced, my schwa under my first radical. So I haven't added it. I did not add an ending to this, but it's still kind of in construct, right? This is a Qal infinitive construct. So to listen or hearing, and then ma zavach tov. To listen from, zavach means to sacrifice. To listen from sacrifice, good. Now that doesn't make any sense in English. But remember what the main can do. It can mean from, or it can mean better than. A comparative form, right? So to listen from sacrifice, good. So maybe to listen is better than sacrifice. Listening often is equated with obeying in the Bible. Like when you really listen, it means that you actually do the thing. So an example, so for example, to listen to God's law, to really listen to God's law. I mean, the Shema is the prayer in Deuteronomy 5, right, where it says, Shema Yisrael, listen up, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. So what it really means is like, do this stuff, Israel. So in any event, here we go. To listen or to obey is better than sacrifice. Remember I said you can add prepositions to these things. You often see them with a lamed, these infinitive constructs. So for example, sar, lir ot. Remember the ot ending? Remember what that does with infinitive constructs? Yeah, so think of a hey being there. So ra'ah, that's to see. So sar, which comes from the verb that means to turn. So to turn, to see. To turn, to see. This comes from Exodus 3. Moses turned to see this great sight, why the bush was not burning up. We can also think with the lamed, sometimes it's like kind of elaborating, like, clarifying something. So, tziviticha, so tzava means to command. Tziviti means I have commanded. Tziviticha means I have commanded you. Lemor, to say, lo tochal mimenu. I have commanded you to say, but really this means saying. So if you ever see lemor, that's lamed, this word right here, lemor. It occurs a lot in the Bible. And it's the lamed preposition means to, and this is our Qal infinitive construct, which means to say. But what this really means is like saying. It oftentimes, you think of it in terms of a comma and then open quotation marks. Like, I commanded you, saying, what I said back then was, or I commanded you, quotation marks. You shall not eat from it. So achal means to eat. You shall not. Lo, you should never eat from it. Never, 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 never. Remember, lo means never, never, never. Al means not right now. So God commanded about the fruit in the garden. Never, 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 never eat from it. this is min, and then this is that strange anomalous third person masculine singular form that only shows up with mimenu. So from it. So anyway, but this idea that lamed plus infinitive construct can mean like kind of elaborating, clarifying, or to introduce speech with lemor, or to indicate an event that's about to happen. So gam, that should be it's there, it's just not in the right color for some reason. But gam, so also, bavel, lin pol. Gam, bavel, meaning Babylon, to fall. Also, Babylon is about to fall. Jeremiah is saying this at the end of his book as Babylon is falling. So, Vayahi Hashemesh lavo. Vayahi, and it happened, Hashemesh, the sun, lavo, to go. And as the sun was setting. So notice it's something that's about to happen, right? There are some times where the Qal infinitive construct makes sense in terms of like a temporal clause, like in terms of something about time. So bayom achalcha, mimenu. So on the day eating of you from it. So on the day that you eat from it, or when you eat from it, is how this is often translated in English. So the Qal infinitive works there because it's about like on the day of your eating, right? The action isn't being described. The eating isn't the action. The action has yet to be named in this sentence, but something's going to happen on that day that you eat from it, right? But this action of eating is the noun. When the eating thing happens, then this other thing's going to happen. So this is the eating thing, the noun, when you eat of it. So here, Vayhi Bishkon Yisrael Ba'aretz Ha-hi. So, and it happened when, like ba can mean on or at, and temporally it can mean at the time of, when the dwelling, shakan, to tabernacle, to dwell, of Israel in the land, ha-hi, remember he means she, in that land, or vayahi kavo Avram Mitzrayma. And it happened, kavo, ka means like or as, so as to go, Abraham, Mitzrayim is Egypt, and then there's an a at the end, kamateh, which means words, right? And it happened, and as Abraham was going towards Egypt. So here's our temporal clause, like kind of when this was happening, then this other stuff happened. And that's when the real kind of sentence begins. That's when the real verb happens, and then the real subject happens, right? And as Abraham was doing this, then this other thing happened. So when Israel dwelled in that land, as Abraham was entering Egypt. There you go. I know that that's a lot of information this week, the Qal participles, the Qal infinitives, and absolutes. But what the good thing is that you have now learned all of the Qal. You haven't learned all of the different forms of the weak roots, I know. But all of the forms of the Qal we've discussed now, and we've worked through it. And so what we're going to do now for the rest of the class is to move to these other stems, these other forms of the verb. So we finished Qal. We're going to move on to Nifal. It's going to be fun. Come on now. I know I can hear it. I can feel it through this computer. I can feel that you might be feeling a little discouraged right now. Here, you have finished 70% of verbs in Hebrew that are in the Bible. That's an amazing feat. You have learned all of the grammar to explain 70% of the verbs and translate 70% of the verbs in the Bible. That's awesome. Just a couple months ago, you knew none of this. You couldn't even read a Hebrew letter, and you are reading whole Hebrew sentences and translating whole chapters. You are doing awesome. Keep up the great work, and God will be with you wherever you go.